Many advocates of interventionism are bewildered when one tells them that in recommending interventionism, they themselves are fostering anti-democratic and dictatorial tendencies and the establishment of totalitarian socialism. They protest that they are sincere believers and opposed to tyranny and socialism. What they aim at is only the improvement of the conditions of the poor. They say they are driven by considerations of social justice and favor a fairer distribution of income precisely because they are intent upon preserving capitalism and its political corollary or superstructure, viz. Democratic government. What these people fail to realize is that the various measures they suggest are not capable of bringing about the beneficial results aimed on. On the contrary, they produce a state of affairs from which the point of view of their advocates is worse than the previous state which they were designed to alter. If the government, faced with this failure of its first intervention, is not prepared to undo its interference with the market and return to a free economy, it must add to its first measure more and more regulations and restrictions. Proceeding step by step on this way, it finally reaches a point in which all economic freedom of individuals has disappeared. Then socialism of the German pattern, the Zweitswirtschaft of the National Socialists, emerges. We have already mentioned the case of minimum wage rates. Let us illustrate the matter further by an analysis of the typical case for price control. If the government wants to make it possible for poor parents to give more milk to their children, it must buy milk at the market price and sell it to these poor people with a loss at a cheaper rate. The loss may be covered by the means collected by taxation. But if the government simply fixes the price of milk at a lower rate than the market, the results obtained will be contrary to the aims of the government. The marginal producers will, in order to avoid losses, go out of the business of producing and selling milk. There will be less milk available for consumers, not more. The outcome is contrary to the government's intentions. The government interfered because it considered milk as a vital necessity. It did not want to restrict its supply. Now the government has to face the alternative, either to refrain from any endeavors to control prices, or to add to its first measure a second one, i.e. to fix the prices of the factors of production necessary for the production of milk. Then the same story repeats itself on a remoter plane. The government has to again fix the prices of the factors of production necessary for the production of those factors of production which are needed for the production of milk. Thus, the government has to go further and further, fixing the prices of all the factors of production, both human labor and material, and forcing every entrepreneur and every worker to continue to work at these prices and wages. No branch of production can be omitted from this all-round fixing of prices and wages and this general order to continue production. If some branches of production were left free, the result would be a shifting of capital and labor to them, and the corresponding fall of the supply of the goods whose prices the government had fixed. However, it is precisely these goods which the government considers as especially important for the satisfaction of the needs of the masses. But when this state of all-round control of business is achieved, the market economy has been replaced by a system of planned economy, by socialism. Of course, this is not the socialism of immediate state management of every plant by the government, as in Russia, but the socialism of the German or National Socialist pattern. Many people were fascinated by the alleged successes of German price control. They said, "You have only to be as brutal and ruthless as the National Socialists and you will succeed in controlling prices." What these people, eager to fight National Socialism by adopting its methods, did not see was that National Socialists did not enforce price controls within a market society, but they established a full socialist system, a totalitarian commonwealth. Price control is contrary to purpose if it is limited to some commodities only. It cannot work satisfactorily within a market economy. If the government does not draw from this failure the conclusion that it must abandon all attempts to control prices, it must go further and further until it substitutes socialist all-around planning for the market economy. Production can either be directed by the prices fixed on the market by the buying and the abstention of buying on the part of the public, or it can be directed by the government's Central Board of Production Management. There is no third solution available. There is no third social system feasible, which would be neither market economy nor socialism. Government control of only part of prices must result in a state of affairs which, without any exception, everybody considers as absurd and contrary to purpose. Its inevitable result is chaos and social unrest. It is this that the economists have in mind in referring to economic law and asserting that interventionism is contrary to economic law. The focal point of the market economy is the market, i.e. the process of formation of commodity prices, wage rates, interest rates, and their derivatives, profits and losses. It makes men in their capacity as producers responsible to the consumers. This dependence is direct with entrepreneurs, capitalists, farmers, and professional men, and indirect with people working for salaries and wages. The market adjusts the efforts of all those engaged in supplying the needs of the consumers to the wishes of those for whom they produce, the consumers. It subjects production to consumption. The market is a democracy in which every penny gives the right to vote. It is true that the various individuals have not the same power to vote. The richer man casts more ballot than the poorer fellow. But to be rich and to earn a higher income is, in a market economy, already the outcome of a previous election. The only means to acquire wealth and to preserve it in a market economy, not adulterated by government-made privileges and restrictions, is to serve the consumers in the best and cheapest way. Capitalists and landowners who fail in this regard suffer losses, and if they do not change their procedure, they lose their wealth and become poor. It is the consumers who make poor people rich and rich people poor. It is the consumers who fix the wages of a movie star and an opera singer at a higher rate than those of a welder or an accountant. Every individual is free to disagree with the outcome of an election campaign or of a market process, but in a democracy, he has no other means to alter things than persuasion. If a man were to say, "I do not like the mayor elected by majority vote, therefore I ask that the government replace him with the man I prefer," one would hardly call him a Democrat. But if the same claims were raised with regard to the market, most people are too dull to discover the dictatorial aspirations involved. The consumers have made their choice and determined the income of the shoe manufacturer, the movie star, and the welder. Who is Professor X to arrogate to himself the privilege of overthrowing their decision? If he were not a potential dictator, he would not ask the government to interfere. He would try to persuade his fellow citizen to increase their demand of the products of the welders and to reduce their demand for shoes and pictures. The consumers are not prepared to pay for cotton prices, which would render the marginal farms, i.e., those producing under the least favorable conditions, profitable. This is very unfortunate indeed for the farmers concerned. They must discontinue growing cotton and try to integrate themselves in another way into the whole of production. But what shall we think of the statesman who interferes by compulsion in order to raise the price of cotton above the level it would reach on the free market? What the interventionist aims at is the substitution of police pressure for the choice of the consumers. All this talk, the state should do this or that, ultimately means the police should force consumers to behave otherwise than they would behave spontaneously. In such proposals as, let us raise farm prices, let us raise wage rates, let us lower profits, let us curtail the salaries of executives, the us ultimately refers to the police. Yet the authors of these projects protest that they are planning for freedom and industrial democracy.